It is now 2025, and people still genuinely believe that there is something magical about barbells. And not only are barbells magical, but machines are actually the opposite. Machines are dysfunctional. Now, on the one hand, I don't really think that people should take either one of these claims particularly seriously. These kinds of claims are so deeply rooted in dogmatism that it's almost not even worth it to try to break them apart. But on the other hand, this doesn't really stop people, specifically fitness influencers, from espousing such opinions as if they're fundamental truths. So today I'm going to fully debunk the idea that barbells possess some kind of mystical, magical quality. So let me just steel man the case for the barbell, because I think that the barbell does a lot of things really, really well, and I think that the barbell can be extremely useful. Number one, the barbell is really easy to figure out how to use, unlike many machines. And although individualizing and perfecting technique on any barbell lift can be quite difficult, barbells are highly accessible, right? Grab the bar, lay down on a bench and press, just mimic what other people are doing, or put it on your back and start to squat, or pick it up off the floor, right? All these things are fairly straightforward. And again, it's not that perfecting technique is necessarily easy, but simply just performing any of these barbell motions will give you a lot of bang for your buck, especially if you're a beginner trainee. The second thing that barbells do really well is they're the number one near universal piece of equipment, right? Regardless of where you are in the world or what gym you're training at, the barbell right next to dumbbells is the most recognizable and familiar piece of equipment to the vast majority of people who ever encounter exercise. And because of its universality, people understand the experience of a barbell, right? They know what it is like. They know what it feels like to put 135 pounds on the bar. And to go along with this, most people also then recognize just how impressive it is when other people are lifting heavy weights on the barbell. Machines and other pieces of equipment don't work this way. You don't look at someone doing a machine chest press and look at the weight on the stack and be like, oh my gosh, that's 400 pounds on a chest press machine. We don't really have a good intuition as to what that actually is or feels like. And as a consequence, there's nothing that we can really relate to about that situation. Even if you've used a lot of different chest press machines before, machines can really drastically differ in terms of what the weight actually feels like from different brands of different machines. So a lot of people, as a consequence, really care about the weight that they're lifting on barbell motions, but they really don't seem to care very much about, exercises that involve machines like leg extensions, leg curls, chest presses, pull downs, and rows. Reason number three, last and certainly not least, barbells allow people to easily progressively overload, meaning that you can really easily add small increments of load, especially because the motions that you're doing typically with barbells involve higher amounts of absolute load compared to other exercises. For example, even if you're not the strongest person in the room, if you're performing barbell bench presses, you're using a lot more absolute load compared to, let's say, if you're doing cable lateral raises. Where progressing tiny bits on the cable lateral raise may be very difficult for you, simply adding on a 2.5 pound weight or lighter is pretty easy for most people using any kind of barbell motion. So in short, barbells are easy to understand, they're easy to talk about and understand the experience of, and they're super easy to progressively overload over time. Those are three really important things when it comes to good exercises. But all of these things do not negate the fact that barbells are just another piece of equipment that we can use, and we shouldn't look at the barbell as if it's some kind of mystical, magical exception that other exercises just don't really check the box of. Now, overwhelmingly, when you talk to barbell dogmatists, that's what I like to call them, about why the barbell is so powerful and just unlike any other piece of equipment we can use, they'll say any number of the following kinds of things. Barbells and dumbbells help strengthen the stabilizer muscles. Barbells and dumbbells are therefore more functional than machines. Barbells are more functional than machines because you learn to stabilize using a barbell. This is why machines will always be less impressive. Barbells and dumbbells train your body in proper ranges of motion for the specific individual and also target a lot of the stabilizer muscles. Barbell requires that you move the weight according to your balance and anthropometry. Machines do not provide an equal level of central nervous system activity, balance and coordination stimulus, connective tissue stress, physiological demand and toughness, and overall conditioning. Now, in case you're curious, Yes, these are direct quotations that I've pulled from comments on a lot of my posts from Instagram. So these opinions that I've actually pulled from real people and that I often hear frequently from all different kinds of people. And aside from that last one, which kind of goes off the obfuscation rails, these comments all have a very clear thread between them, which is this notion that free weights of really any kind, not just barbells, but also dumbbells, are superior to things like cables and machines because they require more balance demand. And this is often vaguely referred to as stability. So let's just first address the concept of a stabilizer muscle. And here's a little pop quiz for you. Which muscles function as stabilizers in the body? Now, if you answer this question by naming any specific muscle in the body, you've already got it backwards. And the reason is because regardless of the muscle that you name, muscles do one thing. They contract. Muscles function to pull point A and point B closer together. And whether a muscle's contraction is actively moving a bone from point A to point B or simply resisting any motion from happening at all, every muscle in your body has the capacity to stabilize. In other words, every muscle in your body has the capacity to resist motion. Of course, that doesn't mean that all muscles are the same. Of course, muscles have different architectures, different points of attachment, and different functions. However, when you strip back all of the semantic layers that kind of cloud this conversation, ultimately muscles just contract. That's all that they do. So take the lats, for example, right? A muscle that people seem to generally think of as not like one of those little stabilizers, but as like a prime mover. Well, if you're performing a lat pull down motion, your lats are doing a lot of the moving. So in that instance, we call the lats a prime mover. But now imagine you're performing a triceps push down, right? Where the load is trying to actively shrug your shoulders up to your ears. What role does the lat play in that scenario? It plays the role of a stabilizer muscle. But in either one of these cases, the lats are the lats. Whether you call them a stabilizer or a prime mover is really more a matter of describing their role in either one of these scenarios. But in both scenarios, the lats are simply contracting. And all muscles, again, function this way. We're just programmed to view certain muscles as being certain things and other muscles as other things. Now, the quintessential example of a stabilizer muscle is any muscle in the rotator cuff group. And collectively, it kind of makes sense. I mean, the rotator cuff holds the head of the upper arm into the socket of the shoulder blade. So in one sense, it often plays a stability role by preventing the upper arm from moving out of the shoulder socket. But the minute that one performs an internal or external rotation activity, all of a sudden the rotator cuff group becomes a prime mover. So ultimately, to say that barbells are superior to machines because they train the stabilizers better is really to say nothing at all, right? Because at bottom, there is contraction. That's it. And in any exercise scenario, there are both stabilizers and prime movers that contribute to any motion that in the next exercise and in the next moment may not play the same role at all. So just to zoom back out, I understand why people fall for this whole stability trap. You know, you grab the barbell for the first time and it wobbles side to side or something like that. But people are deeply confused about what stability actually is. And in my estimation, there are really three different kinds of stability. Internal stability is the first kind. This is the kind of stability that occurs at the level of the muscle. Internal stability is basically just resisting of motion with contraction. And so whether it's your pecs or your rotator cuff or your quads, muscles create internal stability around our joints by contracting. Now, external stability occurs at the level of the implement that you're using. It simply describes how free or unconstrained an implement is to move. So for example, barbells in the way that we typically use them tend to be more stable than dumbbells, and machines tend to be more stable than barbells. In other words, if I'm doing a chest press machine, it's only going to move in a single direction. I'm not capable of moving it out of that one path. And so in and of itself, the machine is very stable. I can't deviate it from its path. Now, a barbell press is less stable than a machine press because it has the potential to wobble, unlike a machine. But a barbell press is still more inherently stable than a dumbbell press because the dumbbells can fall in any which direction. And then lastly, we have this third kind of stability, which I call exercise stability. This basically just refers to how easy or difficult it is for someone to balance the motion they're trying to create. Now, exercise stability is ultimately the conversation, or what comes of the conversation, between internal and external stability. Now, this is really, really important to understand because people often conflate internal stability with exercise stability, especially in the case of barbell motions. So here's what this means concretely. People tend to think that because a barbell is less externally stable than something like a machine, that therefore we challenge our internal stabilizers, our muscles, to a greater degree with barbell motions as compared to machines. But this isn't true. And this completely misses the mark on what stabilizers actually are. They're just muscles that perform some kind of role given any exercise scenario. So if someone is performing a machine chest press and they obviously are having no trouble balancing the handles because again, they're completely balanced in and of themselves, the internal stabilizers, right? The pecs, any of the rotator cuff muscles, any of the triceps muscles, any of the deltoid muscles, all these muscles are working just as hard, if not harder, than in the case of a barbell bench press, where you have the additional consideration of having to balance the bar in this sort of side to side or rotational direction, or sort of forward to backward so it doesn't fall forward or fall backward onto your face. In other words, the necessity to have to balance the barbell on all different kinds of planes will actually decrease the amount of internal muscle contraction required to perform the motion. Why? Well, because unlike in a machine press, you're not able to just be pushing into the machine. You have to worry about the balance component. And so therefore you can't actually produce as much force into the barbell as you otherwise might be. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that barbell motions don't produce results. They obviously do. But if we're going to talk about the merits of how stability is trained in either case, there's no more stability trained in a barbell bench press compared to a machine chest press, in the sense that in both cases, we're just training muscle. So again, although it may be more difficult to balance the barbell over your hands in the case of a barbell press compared to a machine press, your rotator cuff muscles are working just as hard, if not harder, in the case of the machine press, because again, stability inside the body is just contraction and management of joint position. It's not the same thing as this like external capacity to balance something like we're in the circus. So here we get to this really important takeaway, and hopefully the primary takeaway from this video, which is that at bottom, force is force. And we can really define exercise as the interaction between external forces we impose on our body and the internal muscular responses we have to create against that external loading. And so let's say we place a barbell on our back to train our quads and our glutes. Fundamentally, there is no difference between that kind of force that is imposed on your back in the case of a barbell squat and the kind of force that is placed on your back, let's say in the case of a hack squat. So fundamentally, the barbell applies a force to our backs, and the hack squat pad applies a force to our backs. And whether this force is coming from a metal bar or from pads that are nicely cushioned so that it's more comfortable for you, force is force is force is force in either scenario. And forces, as far as I'm aware, don't have emotions and they don't have personal preferences about what exercises are better or worse for us. And it is only through this lens of force that we can actually understand what the hell is going on in every exercise. And when an understanding and a focus on force is removed, we end up saying silly things like free weights, specifically barbells, possess some kind of mystical quality that we can't begin to describe. And the barbell lifts specifically have been sort of promoted and put up on this pedestal to sort of near mythical status, as if they're exercises that somehow exist outside the boundary of our understanding of physics. And so like any other dogma, the belief in the mystical superiority of the squat, the bench, and the deadlift doesn't persist because of some kind of evidence to suggest that it's true, but rather because of tradition and social and emotional reinforcement. And again, I still see tons of this to this day, where people just elevate these lifts above all others because they've been told that they're the best, and they haven't thought to question why that was in the first place. But all this reverence is just based on unquestioned assumptions. If you ask someone why these lifts are the best, they'll say vague kinds of things like I described earlier about stability and how these are the kings of the lifts and how they're the most difficult and therefore they create the best results. But clearly people create results doing all different kinds of exercises. And so my goals in saying this are simply just to strip away the mysticism around these barbell movements. Barbell squat is not magical, right? It's just an exercise that loads your ankles, knees, hips, and spine as you move through a given range that's comfortable for you. And in the same way, a squat in the Smith machine or a squat in the hack squat or a leg press, all these things fundamentally do the same thing. They load the body and they ask muscles to contract against the resistance. This isn't to say that all exercises are the same. They're obviously not. But what makes the difference is not some kind of mystical, magical idea we can't understand. It's simply just a difference in the way that we interact with the forces and in the particular constraints of the exercise, like whether or not it's in a machine. And the barbell lifts obviously produce results. That much is self-evident. But what else is self-evident, or at least should be, is that machines and other implements are just as valuable, if not more valuable in certain instances, than the barbell. For instance, a barbell will never be able to guide you in specific paths in the way that machines are. A barbell will also never be able to change its own resistance against you in the same way that a machine might be able to change its resistance profile. And a barbell will never be able to be as specific to a particular muscle in the same way that a specifically designed machine would be, for instance, like a preacher curl machine or a leg extension machine. So again, this is not to say that you shouldn't use barbells, but rather just to say that you need to be able to open your mind to other possibilities, especially if you're in this lifting game for the long term. A lot of people I know are poisoned by this idea that they must be doing the barbell lifts, and yet for whatever combination of reasons, they're finding themselves constantly in discomfort doing them. So this is just all to say that you should not feel tied to having to do specific exercises, not just of the barbell movements, but of any kind. Creating more dogma around these specific kinds of exercises just decreases our ability to think critically and to problem solve whenever we run into scenarios that we are having a tough time working past. So the next time that you're in the gym and you feel like you have to perform specific motions, just remember, force is force, no matter what implement that you use. And barbells don't build muscle, force builds muscle.